both of us. Now, Caleb Maupin is on the line. As I said earlier, he's my favorite American correspondent. I met him once. He called me a legend. I called him one. We both love each other. And Caleb will be with us through the weeks and months between now and the picking of a Democratic Party challenger and, of course, the US presidential election too. But first, Caleb, welcome to the show. I want to ask you about this oil tanker. It now turns out that the British Army takes its orders from Washington. Don't you know it? It was Trump and Bolton who told the British government that they had to board this oil tanker. How was that story played out in the US media?
Well, you know, the amount of bias related to anything related to Iran in the United States is pretty massive. You almost want to do a double take and imagine that the shoe was on the other foot. What would be the response of the United States if an American oil tanker had been seized by a foreign country? The response would obviously be quite a bit of massive outrage and possibly some kind of military action. And, of course, this is then fit in with a narrative that apparently the only reason the Syrian government hasn't collapsed is because of, you know, the support it allegedly receives from Iran. You know, apparently no Syrian would ever not want their country to be overrun by Wahhabi terrorists and extremists. No Syrian would ever want to continue religious freedom and elections and such in their country. It fits in with a whole narrative about Iran, blaming Iran for all the problems of the Middle East, as if everything would be just fine over there, as if Saudi Arabia is not causing problems, as if Israel is not causing problems. Unfortunately, media bias in the United States related to Iran is rather massive. However, I will say that among Democrats and critics of the Trump administration, there has been a fear and a vocal fear of going to war. And there has been, you know, surprisingly, in some cases lately, it seems like the Democrats are more pro-war than the Republicans. But many Democrats, you know, spoke up and said they were very, very nervous about the entire situation, just like they were nervous about the drone situation and being shot down and the possible 10 minutes away strike, just like they were nervous about the oil tanker accusations. It seems many Democrats are weary of the fact that some forces within the Trump administration seem determined to get us into a war with Iran, and a lot of Democrats seem to realize that that's undesirable.
Of course, one of the reasons why Trump pulled back must have been that some wise counsel in his own head or somewhere else must have said to him, this could run right up to the presidential election. We could be at war.
Sure. And Trump, I think, for whatever reason, maybe it's just his own ego, he doesn't want to be the guy. You know, Lyndon Johnson was the guy. He did Gulf of Tonkin. He got us into the Vietnam War. And everyone has seen that clip in the United States where he says, Lyndon Johnson will not accept the nomination of my party for another. I mean, it was a shameful thing to be the guy to get us into the war, right? George W. Bush, you know, despite the fact that he was reelected, is always going to be remembered as the guy who did the Iraq thing. And maybe Trump's ego is just strong enough. He just doesn't want to be the guy. And you have to ask yourself, you know, as somebody who you know, observed and reported on the 2016 election, would Hillary Clinton have been as reluctant to be the guy as Trump was? You have to ask yourself that question.
Well, personally, I believe we'd already be at war, probably over Syria, if she had been the president. But it's screaming out to me, Caleb, that Trump doesn't want to be the guy. He wants to be re-elected. I believe his instincts are, as he adumbrated them during the actual presidential election campaign, against further interventionist wars. That then tells me that the people around him, Bolton, Pompeo, the CIA chief, they're dragging him into this.
Well, there are rumors circulating, and I know John Kiraku and others, there are rumors circulating about some kind of disagreement between Trump and Bolton. And there's a lot of people, you know, speculating, where is John Bolton? Why haven't we heard as much from him lately? What's going on? There is talk of some kind of disagreement between them. But what you said about Trump campaigning on a platform of being opposed to intervention, really, I mean, it was reiterated. I mean, that was a big part of why he was elected, and we saw that play out at the first Democratic Party debate with Tulsi Gabbard. And Tulsi Gabbard, you know, who's often treated as a fringe candidate in the mainstream media of the United States, was not given anywhere near as much attention and time as the other candidates, yet she came out as the surprise dark horse winner of the first presidential Democratic debate because she spoke so strongly against continued U.S. occupation of Afghanistan and continued intervention. And it seems that among both Democrats and Republicans, there is a strong desire to see an end to this constant war and military interventionism around the world.
Now, she's got nearly 100,000 individual donors. She is a dark horse. She's come from virtually nowhere for the mass media anyway. Is it credible that she can survive the coming primary season?
Well, you know, we will just have to see. And, I mean, if you watch, for those, you know, who didn't follow the U.S. Very closely, we had not one night, but 2 nights. The first debate was divided into 2 evenings because there were so many Democratic candidates. And it was almost like some kind of, you could say it was some kind of bad entertainment, professional wrestling. I mean, everybody was there. We had, you know, all kinds of, we had Marianne Williamson, the spiritual guru of Oprah, and she was talking about how she was going to defeat Donald Trump with the power of love. And you had Andrew Yang, who was running on a platform of universal basic income. You had all kinds of people there. I mean, it was every different voice, every different little cause you could have heard of was represented. But yet the media seemed to be focusing on 4 or 5 major candidates. Some of the candidates, Andrew Yang in particular, complained about the fact that the format was set up so that when the moderators called on people, somebody else could just jump in. That was how the debates were set up. But yet other people's microphones were not turned on. Andrew Yang, the candidate who was running on this universal basic income platform, he complained that that he was not able to jump in like the other candidates were. That these are very much made-for-TV debates, and that it seems like we have so many candidates running. But yet the focus is on a few front runners who are being given all the media attention, and it's almost like the rest are almost just background noise. It's not exactly being framed completely fairly in American media.
Well, let's turn to the front runners. The one that interests me the most, and the one that if I had a vote I'd be casting it for, is Senator Sanders. Would you say that he has faltered a little bit? That's certainly how the media has presented it over here.
Well, his campaign staff has voiced a great deal of outrage about the fact that the media is almost declaring their campaign to be over based on a few polls, whereas there are other polls showing different things, showing him second right behind Joe Biden. And furthermore, that it seems like one of the things that seems to be causing so much confusion and maybe weakening Sanders is the fact that his platform has been adopted by almost all the other major candidates. They're all calling for Medicare for all now. They're all practically calling for guaranteed college for Americans now. So is that really a loss if the other candidates are adopting your platform? But the Bernie Sanders staff, they have voiced outrage about it, and they seem to emphasize the fact that they have a very big network of volunteers, that they are out fundraising themselves from 2016 by very big numbers. They're very confident, and they feel like the media is just anxious to declare them to be defeated, you know, a year before the election even begins, even before the primary votes take place. Very strange, but regardless, Sanders seems to have a very strong base of support. Some polls are putting him in 4th place now. Other polls are putting him in 2nd place. But he's up there with Biden. He's up there with Kamala Harris. He's up there with Elizabeth Warren. He's considered one of the front runners.
Now, here's my take on those two, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. It might be a bit unkind, but on this side of the water, we can be that. For me, Joe Biden is Hillary Clinton without the lipstick, and Kamala Harris is Hillary Clinton with the lipstick. What's your response to that?
Well, I mean, that's certainly an amusing way of putting it. Kamala Harris, was the top prosecutor in the state of California. And she has tried to reframe herself as a progressive, as someone who fought for low-income people, but that record just doesn't match with what actually took place. There's video of her laughing about jailing parents because their children have skipped school, and laughing about the fact that she's locking up low-income parents because their children were absent from school. There's a clip of her laughing and mocking people protesting the fact that there's money being spent on prisons and the school-to-prison pipeline, and there's not a funding of education in the United States. That she, as much as she's trying to frame herself as someone who fought for the low-income people and all of that, she has a pretty ugly record as a lock-em-up candidate, as someone who enabled California to become the top incarceration state. And she's got a lot to answer for there. Furthermore, she seems to really emphasize that her criticism of Trump is that he's not warlike enough. She criticized Trump for his recent negotiations with Kim Jong-un and North Korea. She attacked that as a photo op. She's opposed to making peace with North Korea. She's made that pretty clear. She's opposed to any effort to reconcile with Russia. And she seems to very much represent the forces that Hillary Clinton represented, which seem to be more aggressive around the world, and to favor a more authoritarian police state here at home.
What about Joe?
And, he very much is the favorite of a lot of people. But people said his debate performance was not good. It seemed like every candidate just took turns. It was almost like they were lining up to punch him or something. They all took turns going after him, and he didn't really come back very strongly. People are saying his debate performance was pretty weak, and people wonder if he really wants the job. He was very close to the job under Obama. He was the vice president, and people have wondered is he running simply because there's pressure on him to run? Does he really want the job? Because his campaign does not seem to have the kind of enthusiasm and strength that other campaigns have had. But he is very likable. He has a long career in the Senate. He's got that whole Irish working class, urban cop fireman appeal. He's an average Joe. He's Joe Biden. He's got a charisma that has gotten him far in politics, has kept him in the Senate for many years. So people wonder if he could actually end up being the nominee, and that a lot of Trump voters would find his personality very appealing. So he's certainly in the race, despite the fact that people aren't seeing the energy they thought that would be there when Joe Biden ran.
Now, finally on that, although stay on the line because we've got some callers with questions for both of us. There was an arrest today, charges today, of someone who is said to be close to the Clintons, Bill Clinton in particular, but also I've seen him in more than one photo opportunity with Donald Trump. I had the feeling that this arrest, these charges, are going to be very big in the United States. Sketch, if you would, the background to them.
Well, Jeffrey Epstein, that's the name, and he is an individual very wealthy, and there is quite a history there showing him, engaging in inappropriate and sexual behavior with minors. And he's been arrested, and this is something that has raised a lot of eyebrows. I mean, he's had a reputation for many years. There are many people that feel this guy has skated justice, and that he's basically bought himself out of facing justice for his actions. And I think there's many people that are very happy about his arrest. Now, there are many Trump supporters, who especially would tie him with Hillary Clinton, and there's, the whole Pizzagate conspiracy theory, and there's that whole world where there are people that are thinking this is part of a much bigger operation in the background. There are also folks that are saying this is just the Me Too movement being heard. This is women who've been sexually harassed, women speaking up, and finally the Justice Department saying, look, this guy may be a wealthy investor, but he's doing things with underage girls. That's not acceptable. He's preying in particular on women, teenage girls in foster care and such. A despicable human being who needs to be brought to justice. But the whole country is watching the case very closely.
Hang on for a minute, Caleb, would you? Because Ken is on the line from Gibraltar. Ken.
Well, it wasn't Ken. It was actually Kieran.
I beg your pardon, Kieran.
It's fine. Well, my family moved to Gibraltar because, you know, it's lovely tax haven status, but I've been watching the local reporting about the oil tanker, and I don't think it's as conspiratorial as you're saying, to be honest.
Tell me.
Well, because it's because the courts have to issue an order about 48 hours after they took the ship, and I know some of the judges here, and they're just following EU law against Syria, not against Iran. So I don't think it was ordered by John Bolton. I don't agree with, obviously, it's the usual, you know, prodding to get them to prod back. And I know that Trump wants a war, or John Bolton wants a war so they can win the next election. But I don't think it's conspiratorial, to be honest. So
you're telling me that the government of Iraq decided to enter international politics by seizing an oil tanker? Are you seriously putting that to me, Kieran?
They're following the law. That's the law of the EU, and they're doing the balancing act as everyone else is against Spain and everyone.
Why did no other European government do it then? Why just the government of Iraq?
Well, okay, what happens is the oil tanker must have come from the Atlantic, and then the first place it went was Gibraltar Wharves, because that's the cheapest for oil. So that makes sense.
No, it doesn't, because they would have sailed surely past into Portuguese waters, wouldn't they?
I'm not sure about that. These oil tankers are big.
If you're turning into the Mediterranean, it seems to me that you have to be in Portuguese waters before you're in Gibraltar waters.
Well, even if any, I'm still almost 100% sure it wasn't ordered, because they got word from the British Foreign Office saying that you got this oil tanker and it's against EU law.
That's exactly my point. So it was the British Foreign Office that told the government of the Rock to seize this tanker. Yeah.
Well, the government of the Rock looked at the current law, again, from the EU law, not American law, not US sanctions,
but no other European government was prepared to do that. And the Spanish government, whose waters they are, is extremely angry about the British, British
why do you think that? What evidence do you have that it was in Spanish water?
Well, I don't have evidence. I've only got the word of the Spanish government.
I wouldn't take those seriously, because one time I was actually off the edge of the coast there, and there was a Spanish police boat that drove right past 10 meters, well, about 10, 20 meters away. So the Spanish government always tries to get on Gibraltar's territorial waters because they want the rock.
Well, we'll discuss that another day, but look, I mean, you're talking about the EU. Spain is a rather significant member of the EU. It is extremely angry about the seizure of the oil tanker. You've just conceded to me that the government of Iraq were told by the British Foreign Office in London to do this. Yet you dispute my contention that the British government told them to do so because the American government told them to do so. Let's hear from Caleb, see what he makes of this rather arcane point. Caleb.
Well, you know, there is a faction among Trump's supporters, and it is closely tied to the Likud party in Israel. I would say the majority of Israel supporters in the United States do not favor Trump, but there is a particular faction, you know, with Sheldon Adelson and with the evangelical Christian right wing that are very closely tied to the Netanyahu wing of Israeli politics, and they see any escalation with Iran, any attack on Iran, any effort to be, you know, just sticking it and being as hard as Iran, as hard on Iran as you can be, they see that as a plus, and they see that as proof that Trump is their man. And I think that that is a factor we also cannot rule out, that as Trump faces the 2020 election, there is a faction that he really wants to maintain the support of, and that is that right-wing Likud party faction of Israel. And let's remember that there is a big, significant amount of American Israel supporters and American Israelis that don't like Trump. When Trump spoke at the American Israeli Political Action Committee, there were a number of the people there who walked out or didn't listen to his remarks, and There are a number of Israelis who feel Trump is not trustworthy. You know, there are constant allegations that Trump has used anti-Semitic overtones in his rhetoric. So it's mixed. You know, not all Israel supporters are strong supporters of Trump, but the faction among Israelis that are supporters of Trump are very, very obsessed with Iran.
Kieran, last word to you.
Oh, well, my point was just that I know the Gibraltar government, I know a lot of people there, and they're just following what is current EU law. I personally think that EU law is bad. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to curse, but I just think they were following EU law. I don't think it was a conspiracy, but that's it.
Kieran, it's a bit unfair me asking you, but I'm aware of no EU law that forbids Syria from buying oil from Iran.
No, the EU, when the EU places sanctions because they're a trading bloc, aren't they? That's how it works.
Yeah, but as far as I know, there are no sanctions against Syria buying oil. Well,
I guess people watching can just Google that. I mean, the local coverage, which is a very well-trusted agency, said that. I could Google it again, check a few more sources.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot, and you're a civilian. Yeah. Why should you know the law? But what I can certainly tell you with absolute certainty is there are no oil sanctions between Iran and Syria. The oil belonged to Iran. It had been sold to Syria, and anyone stealing it, in my opinion, is guilty of piracy. Well, Kieran, thanks. You've been very helpful. You've stirred the pot. I'm sure others will respond to it. Caleb, can I ask you one more question?
Sure.
On another subject, really. I'm looking at the presidential election. I'm waiting for it with bated breath. I have been one who predicted that Trump would win the first presidential election. I was almost alone in doing so. And I took the view that whilst not happy that Donald Trump was now the president of the United States, I was very happy that Hillary Clinton wasn't. Now, with your hat on as an analyst and as a man who knows politics and knows those states, those swing states that will make the difference, at this distance, what would your prediction be about the 2020 presidential election?
It looks very good for Trump right now. Things look very, very good for him. He still has the support in the key states. He's telling folks that the economy is doing well and unemployment is low. However, one factor that you can't forget is these trade sanctions, this trade war, I guess, these tariffs on China. You can't forget that. And that a lot of these red states where Trump has his support are agricultural states. And the trade war with China has not been good for those who sell the soybean. It's not been good for those who sell and manufacture and export beef. And the agricultural sector has hurt quite a bit, from Trump's trade war with China. And that the economy right now, it's still, we keep seeing signs that there could be trouble ahead. The jobs numbers are shaky. And if the economy isn't still glowing, Trump claimed we're in the middle of an economic miracle at his last State of the Union. If the economy doesn't continue to have this bright, optimistic outlook on it, if things aren't going economically well, Trump could be in a world of hurt pretty quick. But right now, I think things look pretty good for him, especially with so much confusion and unclarity on the Democratic side.
He tweeted this week, and you may say that self-praise is no praise at all, merely narcissism, that the whole world envied the United States, and he thanked the President of the United States, who happens to be himself, in a tweet. He thanked himself for these record economic numbers, the stock market, the jobs market, and so on. How much of that is down to him?
Well, I think people around the world certainly don't envy our rate of debt. The household rate of debt and the student rate of debt in the United States at this point is massive. And we're looking ahead at some big problems on the economy Because how in the world do you expect people that already have maybe $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 dollars worth of student debt from attending university to then go and get loans from banks to keep buying houses, to get loans from banks to keep buying cars, right? And that the economic fallout and the decline of the living standards and the income gap between the generations is waiting to play out. And that there's a lot of economic difficulties. We are seeing growth right now. Trump has legalized a lot of the lending practices that were outlawed by the Obama administration. He lifted a lot of the restrictions on oil drilling. He did a lot to give kind of a boost to spending when he first came into office. But the underlying problems of the disappearing good-paying industrial jobs, the low-wage economy, the high rate of debt, that is still there. And for him to just boast this way, it could really come back to haunt him. These over-the-top boasts, if things go south real quick, we could have Trump with a lot of egg on his face, as they say. He could be in a lot of trouble for these over-the-top boasts.
Caleb Maupin, you're a star man. Thanks for joining us. We hope to talk to you regularly here on Radio Sputnik, on the mother of all talk shows. Let's take a break.